from the waiting room. We want to be cognizant of time.
Okay, then I will kick us off. We have thank you all for joining us today for this NCURA Region 7 Grow in Your Profession. NCURA is the National Council of University Research Administrators, and we here are in Region 7, but we might have some people joining us from outside. All are welcome. The PEDC is Professional Education and Development Committee. We're pleased to welcome you today. I am your chair of the PEDC currently, and we have these sessions called Grow in Your Profession, where we can have topics that come with mild presentation, some involvement. So later you might be asked to engage and discuss with each other. At that point, it would be great to unmute or come on camera if you feel so inclined and comfortable. So let's see what our presenters have for us today. This is part 2, as I was mentioning, the Falcon and the Phoenix, and it's about how to make our presentations effective. Today we have Tricia Callahan from Colorado State University and Kyle Unruh from University of Montana, right?
You got it, yep.
I will put in the chat where you can find the previous presentation, and I hope you really like today's offering, and I will pass it off to you all.
Great. We hope you like today's offering as well. And we're so excited that you're here. As Kat mentioned, this is part 2, but don't worry if you missed part 1. Again, you can go back and see it. And we are going to allude to some things from part 1 as well, do some quick reviews. For those who were on the first part, don't worry. Don't be like, oh gosh, they're going to spend so much time going over. It's going to be really quick review. So again, welcome, Falcon and Phoenix. The first review is, what does the Falcon and the Phoenix have to do with developing an effective and engaging presentation? And we used this Falcon and Phoenix theme during our last presentation. And as I mentioned then, absolutely nothing. And our point being is you can use a theme, and you can use a theme effectively in your training and stick to that theme. I've seen people use pterodactyl themes, and they relate everything to dinosaurs and pterodactyls, and they do a really great job. Sometimes I've seen people not do such a great job with relating a topic, a theme. We just had thrown that out there. We actually didn't use the theme. It was just one idea for making your presentation more engaging, more inviting. But if you decide to use a theme, really work it through, stick with it, and make sure it works. But we are not going to be using the theme Falcon and the Phoenix. Just threw it out there for you. So I wanted to remind folks that this is an overview session. Also wanted to remind you of the objectives. So the objectives are to identify best practices in designing and developing that effective, engaging presentation. So we're still in that designing and developing phase. I know that there are some folks on the call who want to get to I want to know about presenting. And we're actually going to do that in our final session, but we're still focused now on that whole developing and designing piece. We're going to give you an opportunity to practice engagers. And also we are going to discuss some tools that we use when we develop effective and engaging presentations. So 2 things that I hope, and hopefully Kyle also hope, that you all get out of today, 2 kind of focus themes for today. One is that content that you're developing, and as you go through and develop your activities and anything that you're going to either give your learners, whether it's a presentation, whether it's a handout, whether it's some kind of resource or video to watch, any activities, anything should match those learning objectives and should match your description, right? I don't know about you all, but when I go to a session and I sit through it and think, wow, this is nothing like the description. Like I came to this session based on the description, and I'm so disappointed when it's nothing like the description. So make sure anything you design and develop matches your description and your objectives. That's number 1. And the other take-home point for today is going to be participant-centered. It's participant-centered on adult learners. And we're going to talk about some different ways that we can make our presentations participant-centered. Okay, so with that, we're going to move on. Hopefully everybody can see the slides. I haven't seen any comments that people can't see. So the very first thing I would like to invite you to do is to type into the chat, if you have the ability to do so, what makes for an effective presentation? When you think about an effective presentation or something that's a really good presentation, what do you think about? What are those key elements that make for an effective presentation? So we're going to give you like a minute to type into the chat. Clear and to the point, engaging, subject and material content, short slides. I like that, short slides. So maybe not too content heavy on the slides. Applicable, okay. Clear and concise. When the speaker is knowledgeable and they don't read off the slides, but they use the slides as a reference. Thank you, Josiah. And Josiah attended a lot of our C.O.R.E sessions where the slides were really dense, right? Because they were there for a reference, but hopefully, Josiah, we didn't read off the slides to you during that time. When the presenter can tie concepts together in ways that make sense, right? We want things to make sense. We don't want to be lost in the presentation or confused in the presentation. Okay. Are there any others? We'll give about 10 more seconds here for folks to chime in. Using stories, right? Makes it personable, makes it relatable. Okay. Kat, if we have others come in, we can chime in with those. But so when thinking about designing an effective presentation, I think sometimes there is this want or impulse, I guess, to throw everything we know about a topic, into the presentation. Whether it's putting on the slides, which makes them really content heavy, which somebody in the chat's like, yeah, we don't want that. And then if somebody's reading all that content heavy, it's, oh man, that person's just droning on. You might be so knowledgeable and have so much information you want to share and all this tangential and related information. But what can happen then is you can get off topic very quickly. I saw in here that people want clear, they want concise, they don't want it to be confusing. So when you're designing, you resist that urge to really throw everything you know about a topic in. Remember to write your project description, remember to write your clear and concise objectives, and then stick to that information. Put in the information and put in the activities that are going to support those objectives, that's going to support that project description or that session description. Okay. If there's additional information you really would like people to have, throw that into an appendix, throw that into additional reference material, but don't make it the body of your slides. So when I'm creating a presentation, I look at my objectives and I think, what do my learners really need to know? What information, what activities do they need to really learn this information? So focus on the need to know, and then all of that like nice to know stuff. Yeah, it'd be really nice to know. Put that in some type of an addition, but don't make it the main body of your presentation. Okay. So when Kyle and I were talking through this, what makes for an effective presentation, here are some of the things that we came up with. And you'll see that some of this matches what you wrote in the chat, right? Content that matches the SMART objectives. Anybody that was on the last call, can you tell me what SMART, what any of those letters stand for? Do you remember SMART? If so, you can unmute or you can type it in the chat. And while people are doing that, we'll go on here to, again, we talked a lot about audience level. And we're going to talk a little bit more about target audience today, but making sure you're matching that. You all talked about clarity. You want a clearly defined structure. You want it to be an organized presentation. So yes, S is specific, M is measurable. Okay. And you want to try to fit it within that time frame. And it might take some practice to do that. Achievable, okay, SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, timely. Right. Those SMART objectives. And again, if you missed You missed that. We have actually on the next slide, just a real quick overview here. Those learner objectives should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Thank you all for that. Write those objectives with your audience in mind. Start developing your content based on those objectives and only put in what your audience really needs to know. Okay, so I reiterated the objectives for today at the beginning. It's always good to reiterate who the target audience is and what your objectives are at the beginning, just to make sure that people are in the right room, right? I don't know if you've flown Southwest, they can be really funny. They're like, if you're not going to Atlanta, then you shouldn't be on this flight, right? If you weren't here to learn about how to develop an effective presentation, then you're not in the right space. So that's what we're focusing on today. Okay, so target audience. Kyle, I'm going to turn this one over to you.
So you all may notice that we're talking a lot about audience. I think every slide so far has mentioned who is your audience. In the last presentation we talked about this as well, and we're bringing it up one more time, just because it's so important to understand how experienced is my audience with the material I anticipate bringing to them, or perhaps you have context for their experience like we do with you all. We've already given one presentation. We suspect some of you watched that and you're ready to move on to the next one. So just take into account everything you can glean about your audience and keep that at the front of your mind when you're developing the content for your presentation. It should inform the language you use, how much content you're trying to fit into the presentation, etc. And then, of course, as we do with NCURA, but if you're doing this internally at your institution, make it clear when you're advertising the presentation who this presentation is appropriate for, so folks have a heads up. And it may be okay for someone who's less experienced to attend a presentation that is targeted for an intermediate or advanced audience, but at least they'll be aware of what they're getting into. Next slide.
Yeah, Kyle, I think what you said is so important, that setting that expectation. I often have people ask, like, how do you know who's going to show up? Well, you just mentioned you can kind of direct who might show up by saying, this is appropriate for somebody new to this field or somebody, very advanced. You can't always control who's going to show up, but at least you set that expectation. And I think a lot of training is expectation management.
All right, thank you, Tricia. So getting into developing our presentation or figuring out a structure, you should find as you're developing the content that you, at least you as the developer, and hopefully your audience, will be able to discern that your presentation has an introduction, it has a body, and it has a conclusion. The introduction should include elements that allow you, well, depending on what's important to you for the purposes of your presentation, but you could consider familiarizing yourself with the audience in the introduction. You could consider giving an overview of where you're headed, like Tricia did for you all today. Just anything you feel would set the tone and get everyone familiar with what's happening. And then in the body, of course, this is basically the meat of the presentation, and it will be largely what we're talking about today. It'll be important in the body that you figure out how to meet your objectives and organize the content in a way that flows smoothly. Maybe you can tie it into some narrative that tracks all the way through the presentation, just to keep people engaged and understanding where you are in the ideas. And it may help them remember too if they're engaged and they can understand what's happening. And then also, please don't forget that it is best practice to put a conclusion at the end of your presentation. In other words, refrain from delivering content all the way to the end of the hour, to the end of the presentation, then signing off. Instead, it's better to come up with a clear, discernible conclusion that reiterates for people what the most important points are, what they should take away, maybe what to look forward to in future presentations, or how they can apply the knowledge that they've gained in this presentation. So again, intro, body, and conclusion, just make sure that you can discern all three components in your presentation.
Great. Thanks so much, Kyle. So I started out saying the 2 expectations for today is to make sure that your content matches your objectives and description, and also that participant engagement piece, right? By a show of hands, first of all, can people come on cameras as you're able to? It'd be great to see some faces here. By show of hands, because I want to be able to see your hands, have you ever been to a training that you thought would never end? So, and hopefully you're not going, yeah, I'm sitting in one right now. Yeah, I've been to those, right? I go and I'm excited. I'm like, I'm going to be engaged. I'm not going to be on my phone. I'm not going to be doodling. And then I find myself about 10 minutes on thinking about what's for dinner, making a grocery list, checking email on the side on my phone, anything other than focusing on the presentation, right? That's the last thing we want in our trainings. We want people to come and we want them to be engaged. So we're going to spend some time to talk about instructor-led, participant-centered engagement. So as you design your training, build in activities, it could even be games for people to allow your folks to participate in the learning activity. And you can actually do this even with an overview or novel audience. You can build in activities that allow them to revisit the material, to go back over concepts that you've introduced and discussed. You can also use other media such as videos, whether it's NCURA YouTube videos or some videos that you have on your campus. So just find ways and build in ways for your folks to interact and review the content, because the more your participants do that, the more they're really not only going to engage, but they're also going to learn as well. So one mantra that I have and that I would like you all to unmute and repeat with me is, the brain that does the talking is the brain that does the learning. Can we unmute and say, the brain that does the talking is the brain that does the learning? Ready? Can we unmute? Ready? The brain
that does the talking
is the brain
that does the doing.
learning. Right? We're very out of sync, but that's okay. Oh, sorry. Thank you for putting that in the chat. I like that. So what that, as an instructor or as a subject matter expert, you know the material. So if you sit there and drone on about it and you revisit the material for them, it's not gonna, the more you talk, the more it's not gonna actually put it into their brain. If anything, they're gonna be disengaged, right? Instead, let your participants do some talking. Let them do the engagement piece. Let them do the revisiting. Give them those opportunities. So participant engagement. Okay, invite them to share their experiences. Invite them to talk. Invite them to ask questions. Some people are shy about asking questions, particularly if you're in a room with your colleagues or maybe your boss and you're like, yeah, I can't ask that question because then they're going to know I don't know. Well, think of other ways for them to ask questions. If it's in the virtual world, they can text you the questions. If you're in a classroom space together, you could have them write their questions on card and drop them in a box during the break. And then you answer those anonymous questions. But give them opportunities to practice the material and to review the content. And most of all, to have fun. And why have fun? Well, because we know when participants are relaxed and engaged and they're having fun, that increases knowledge retention. So they're going to actually learn more and they're going to remember more if they have some fun. So gamification, we're going to talk about that a little bit more and actually show some gamification in our next session. So you'll have to come to that one. We'll do a plug for that one. Okay. So we want to talk here about that body. Remember, Kyle said you have to have the introduction, you have to have the closer, you also have the body. And the body, if any of you have done any fitness or been around fitness instructors, they're always encouraging us to engage our cores. We need strong, healthy cores for our bodies. Well, as trainers, we encourage you to engage your core as well for vibrant and effective training. So what are we talking about here? Cores are closers. So Kyle mentioned having that conclusion. Don't just end the hour and send them on their way. Give them an opportunity to talk about what they learned, what new skills, what new knowledge they got. An opener. An opener sets that tone, it sets the expectation. We're going to talk a little bit more and show you some revisitors and some energizers. Revisitors are a way that your participants can go through and revisit material rather than you doing it for them. Because remember, the brain that does the talking is the brain that does the learning. And then energizers. Those are things that get people moving, whether it's typing into a chat, responding to a poll, asking a question, raising a hand, using some of the emojis and features there if you're in a virtual environment, anything that physically engages that learner. So let's go through some of these. Okay, the first one we want to start with is opener. I know core is C-O-R-E, it starts with closer, but we're going to start with the opener. Okay, so first of all, we have a poll for you. Kat, would you please launch Winter Olympics? Okay, so hopefully everybody can see the poll. Can you please respond on which was the most money spent during the recent Winter Olympics? Type in your answers here. Okay, we have over 80% have participated, which is great for a poll. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. And 100% of people said opening ceremony, and 100% of you are right. Yes, it was the opening ceremony. Why do you think that is? Why do you think of all the events in the Olympics that the opening ceremony gets the most money behind it? Anybody want to chime in? Either unmute or write in the chat. You want to grab people early? Other reasons? To make the noise and grab attention, right? Yeah, set the stage for their competency in hosting. Okay. They're showing off a bit. Everyone's there. Hopefully everyone's there. You haven't lost them yet, right? During your opener, you still have an engaged audience, right? You might get the first 10 minutes of your presentation. I like that one a lot, Mindy, right? They haven't started writing their grocery list yet because you have them there. So much time and money is really spent, because it really sets that expectation of everything else to come. The same way your opener for your session should set the expectation of everything else to come. Early on, we asked you questions. We had you type in the chat. There's that expectation that this is going to be participatory, right? We also reviewed our objectives and we talked about this was for a beginning audience, setting those expectations early on. There we go. So other things that openers do is they break that preoccupation. You have learners coming into your space. We have folks here outside my institution, folks all from our region. You all came into this space today with different things that you might be thinking about, worried about, things that are occupying your mind. It's that place to gather us all together and get us focused on what the topic for this hour is going to be. So it helps to break preoccupation. Sometimes openers, particularly if they're more like icebreakers and activities, can decrease tension for some people. Okay, and decreasing tension helps then open the mind for learning to take place. Okay. It prepares your learners, like I said, it sets that expectation to participate. Also, if you have some type of opening activity for people who arrive late, you haven't already just jumped into the content and they're like, oh, great, what did I miss? Because you're still spending time doing some kind of opening activity. It could be introductions. If this was only 5 people on the call today, we probably would have gone through and done introductions, but with so many people on the call, we couldn't do that. One thing that's really interesting about openers is openers might directly relate to your content, so you can circle back to that content. They don't always have to relate to your content. You could have an icebreaker activity that really the sole purpose is to decrease that tension and that preoccupation. It could be to introduce people, but it might not have anything to do with the content. That's totally okay. What I would encourage you to do, though, is think about the purpose of your opener. Why are you using it? Are you using it to set expectations? Are you using it to introduce people? Are you using it to break preoccupation? When I first came into Colorado State, I went to a unit that had just had an audit, and they were very worried about the audit. And the reason why I was in their training was because of the audit. So there was a lot of tension, there was a lot of preoccupation, there was a lot of worry. So the first thing I invited them to do was to pull out a sheet of paper and a pen and write down what was their biggest worry right at this moment. What were they thinking about? What were they worried about? What were they preoccupied with? And they kind of, everybody slowly got out their paper and they're scribbling. And I said, okay, wad it up and throw it away. And that's where I got looks like they're looking at each other, and then they slowly, and then they started, having fun throwing it away. It's like, okay, throw that away and let's focus for this next hour on allowability, right? Which we were there to talk about. And then it was fun because at the end, they're like, can we just leave our worries on the floor? Do we have to pick them up? I'm like, absolutely, leave your worries on the floor, right? So that opener had nothing to do with allowability in my content, but it was a way to decrease that tension in the room and just kind of get people ready for the learning environment. Okay. Try to start with clean but funny dad joke. I like that. And if you're somebody that you can use humor and jokes, absolutely do it. I don't know if you all know Jeff Ritchie, natural comedian. He's great. I would fall flat on my face. I'm not really good at telling jokes, but if that works for you, I think that's great, Mary. Okay, Kyle, it's on to you.
Energizers. Maybe let's start with a poll here. Kat, could you launch the one on time to a physical break? Okay, so the question is, how long can listeners sit before needing a physical break? Please take 30 seconds or so to plug in your response. All right, about 10 more seconds. Very good. Kat, would you mind wrapping that up and we can share the results? So we had a pretty wide distribution here of responses. Some folks think about 30 minutes, equal amount, 60 minutes. Fewer of us are thinking 90 minutes or 120 minutes. Our research suggests that folks can hang on till about 90 minutes before they really need to get up and move and do something different. That said, it looks like many of you are anticipating, if you do want to go to 90 minutes, that does need to be a substantial break. I mean, that needs to be out of the room, doing something completely different, taking a real break. To the responses in 30 and 60 minutes, it is not a bad idea to shake it up before 90 minutes, which is why we need energizers. And energizers are a way to re-engage people in the presentation in a way that may feel like a break to them, but is likely still tied to the presentation itself. They're not stepping away necessarily and doing something completely different, although perhaps that's what you choose to do, but they can still engage with the content. Kat, could you bring up the content on our slide here? I think it's just the next item.
Not the other poll you're talking about, the next slide.
No, there should be more content on our Energizers slide.
Oh, here, I can bring that up,
Patricia.
and we can also launch the next poll
Patricia.
here.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead, maybe Kat, next poll here. How often should the brain be engaged in a participation activity? Another way of phrasing that is, how long between participation activities should we give folks? Give you all about 10 more seconds to plug in your response.
I was waiting for it to hit the next number, so it would be at 100% of match the last two polls. Great.
All right, let's wrap that one up and share. So again, we have a variety of responses, but we're all in agreement that we can't make it the full hour. And I think we're sort of settling around 10 minutes, which is Tricia and I's, our research suggests that as well. So we need to engage folks in participation at least every 10 minutes or so, or else you risk losing them to the grocery list or thinking about dinner or whatever it may be that Tricia was talking about. So just to frame this for folks, and these two polls were saying, well, you can go up to 90 minutes having them in the room for engaging in this presentation generally, but about every 10 minutes, you're going to have to check in with some sort of participation, which we are calling an energizer here. So an energizer is any activity that's going to mentally or physically stimulate the participants, and consequently, it will engage them and refresh them. Some examples are polls. Notice you all just participated in an energizer. We allowed you to engage yourself and think about your own response and plug it in and then see the results across the group. That's one example of an energizer. You can also bring up case studies and solicit the feedback of folks in the room around that case study and what they're observing or what questions they have. You could whiteboard, you could ask them to plug in responses or review items in the chat. If you're physically working with these folks in a room or anywhere really, you can have them get up and move around. You could do a whiteboard with sticky notes. You could do some activity that breaks them out into groups and gets them to engage with each other. There's really just so many things you can do to get people engaged. The main point here is incorporate these into your presentation at least every 10 minutes or so, and avoid droning on and on, speaking to folks without letting them participate in an energizer for longer than 10 minutes.
That's right, because the brain that does the talking is the brain that does the learning, right? So in an hour session like we have today, you should have 5 to 6 activities or opportunities. They don't always have to be, a formal activity. You can actually throw too much into a presentation. It could be as simple as asking people to raise their hand or to use their hand raise, in Zoom. It could be, to unmute and to repeat a mantra. It could be to type something in the chat, or it could be a polling activity, a video, what have you. So just, it's bringing those people back from their grocery list and back to the presentation and giving them that opportunity to engage. Okay, so we've gone through 2 of those core engagers. Can you please write in the chat what O and E stand for in CORE? O and E. O, openers. Okay, how about E? Okay, openers and energizers. Openers and energizers. Yep, that's the O and E. Okay, and we're going to get to the C and the R in just a minute. Would anybody be willing to unmute and tell the audience what we did as an opener? Do you remember what we did for an opener? What one of the first opening activities was? Or even an energizer, which openers can be energizers.
You asked what makes a good presentation and for the responses in the chat.
Thank you. Yes, that's exactly what we did. We asked for what made for an effective and a good presentation and asked for response. That's how we opened this. That was our opening activity. What other energizers have we had? Meaning opportunities for you to engage and to go away from your grocery list and focus back. So Olympics was an example of an energizer that we use, right? Our polls were energizers, right? This right now, an opportunity. Actually, this opportunity for you to type in what O stood for and E stood for is what we're going to talk about next. It's a revisitor. And did I sit here and say O was for opener, E was for energizer? Or did I let you revisit? Because the brain that does the talking is the brain that does the learning. Okay, or the brain that does the typing. In this case, you typed in opener, you typed in energizer. I know what C.O.R.E stands for. There's no reason for me as an SME to sit here, a subject matter expert to sit here and to just drone on and say what they are. Instead, I let you try to go back and remember. If you didn't remember, look back in your notes and type in what those were. So, yep. So revisitors. Revisitors allow your participants to practice the material, to engage with the material, right? To apply the material, and really just trying to forewarn people as instructors or moderators or subject matter experts, don't reiterate for them. Build in activities where they can reiterate for themselves. Okay. Another thing that we just did, and so we're showing you all the behind the scenes. You wouldn't, one thing you shouldn't do in a training is say, oh, now we're going to do a revisitor, because you know what happens then? People are like, really? Okay, grown. Just do it. Don't announce it. Just do it. Okay. But we're giving you a little behind the scenes. So sometimes we might be announcing these things beforehand. One thing that we also did was something that's based on the EAT principle. EAT, E-A-T, EAT principle. Experience, awareness, and theory. You first let somebody experience something. Okay, so it could be that they experience, say, a YouTube video. Then you bring about the awareness. You unpack that. What did they notice in the video? What things did they pick up on? You might even set the stage for the video to say, hey, we're going to show a video on allowability. Here are some of the things we want you to kind of be focusing on in the video. After they watch the video, they experience it. You talk about awareness. So we let you experience a revisitor before we ever talked about revisitors. You just did on the slide before, this was a revisitor. We didn't tell you it was a revisitor, not until after. We let you experience it first, we bring it to awareness, and then we talk about the theory behind it. And again, the theory behind it is if you allow your participants to practice, that learning is going to stick. They're going to remember it better rather than you just reiterating it to them. So think about the EAT principle when you design your learning. Allow them to experience something first, okay? Then you bring that awareness, and awareness, it could be through discussion of what happened during the experience, what they saw on a video, what they learned in a case study. Talk about that and then unpack it. Explain the theory behind it. Why did we do it? Why did we give you this experience? So start with the experience, move to awareness, then to theory. I think often we want to just start with the theory, right? And then we show the example at the end. Think about flipping that on its head. Start with the example and the experience, then unpack it. Okay. Two different ways you can do it. You don't always have to do it in that order, but a lot of research suggests people are going to get more out of it if they experience something first and have that information to kind of, I say it's like a hook to hang their coat on before you get into the theory. If you just start with the theory, they might not have any like examples to even judge, like, what the heck is this theory about? So start with the experience and then end with theory. So EAT stands for what? I'm not going to repeat it for you. You can type it in the chat or you can unmute. Right now. Is it Nalia? Experience, awareness, theory. Okay, Kyle.
Back to talking about closing out the presentation. Remember, we said it's very important you can discern in your presentation what the introduction is, what the body is, and then make sure that you build in a closer or a conclusion to the presentation instead of spilling out content all the way to the end of the presentation and signing off. So some I mean, too often folks have so much they want to fit in, they do that. They just build in the content and try to get through it by the end of the hour. But in order for folks to retain the information and come away having a clear sense of what they learned and being able to use it into the future, it is important we give them time to digest what they just learned and discuss it among themselves or with the presenter. So some ways to use the closing time would be to use it for action planning, goal setting, or reflection time. You can have the participants actively engage themselves in developing their own reflections. You could also offer some reflections to them and get their feedback. It is important to have them engaged in this portion of the presentation, however. If you feel like the content wasn't too sophisticated and they probably got the message in the body, you could use the conclusion to celebrate. You all can get together and celebrate all you've learned and how you will apply it going forward. You could also use the conclusion to wrap up the body content in a way that you haven't synthesized it yet. That may help people just deepen their knowledge and deepen the retention in this area. So to tie, that is to say, to tie things all together, hence the picture on the slide here. So in any case, take 10 to 15 minutes at the end of your presentation to close it up, provide a conclusion, and have this be a clear, delineated section of your presentation where folks know that's what you're doing. You're wrapping it up, you're trying to understand what happened and how it will be applied going forward.
And again, you don't have to announce it. Now we're going to come to the closing, right? You just do it. Right. When we were actually in physical space together, what I like to do was to put great big sticky sheets on the wall and then get some markers. And part of the closer is to have people go around and on one of the sheets write one new thing that they learned in that session. The other thing, and I like to use this not only as a closer, but also kind of an evaluation piece rather than giving them the traditional fill out this evaluation after. What words do you have for the presenters? And that was, often celebratory as well. And then I would have one on what questions do you still have? Do you still have questions? And then that way we could follow up with people after and we'd have to get their contact. And so that's one way that you can tie it together. That new thing that somebody has learned, questions they have, and then words for the presenters. And then giving people an opportunity to go around and read what other people had written on there. Some people I'd see even taking out their cell phones and taking pictures of it. It was just a nice way to summarize. You can do something like that with a whiteboard, say in Zoom or in Teams. That's another opportunity to do some of those closers, putting people in breakout rooms, having them unpack, having them discuss. Like Kyle said, it could be time to just take a minute and self-reflect. And then it could be a share out with either a small group or the full group. So many different ways that you can do to tie things together and to kind of wrap things up in a nice bow as their parting gift. For folks on the call, are there other examples of closers maybe that you've used in your sessions that you found really effective, or even any other activities? I want to give people an opportunity to share. And if not, that's totally fine.
I love
Okay.
gamification. We use quizzes a lot, for instance, in the C.O.R.E.
Yeah, Kat does real fun with the quizzes. Yes. Yeah, but it's a fun way to tie. And it also lets you realize what information stuck and what didn't stick, right? But it's a fun way of doing it. So yeah, that's great. Okay, Kyle, speaking of timing, since we're in the last 15 minutes.
Thanks, Tricia. So as you all may have heard, we've been referring to timing already several times in this presentation. And that's because obviously presentations are time bound. You have X amount of time to fit in your intro, your body, and your conclusion, and you have to make sure you get it all in. And so part of designing the presentation is figuring out how much time my intro is going to take, how much time the different sections of my body is going to take, and how much time my conclusion is going to take, or my closeout. So in order to make sure, one thing you can do that's fairly simple is to start on time. That'll make sure or ensure that you have the amount of time you expected to have. It's real easy to let the first 5 or even 10 minutes sort of slip away as you're waiting for folks or chatting with folks. But if you start on time, you'll have the full planned time. We've said, begin with an opener, close with a closer. There's a new concept here that isn't entirely new, but the 90-20-10 rule. This means that remember that participants you only have hope of engaging them generally in your presentation for 90 minutes. If you go over 90 minutes with them in that room, they're going to tune out. Every 20 minutes or so, you need to understand that they can only take delivery of content and retain that content for about 20 minutes at a time. So every 20 minutes or so, you need to take a break from introducing new material. And then, as we already covered, about every 10 minutes, they need to be actively engaging via an Energizer. So that's 90-20-10. And as we just talked about with closers, this doesn't just have to be at the end, but certainly at the end, if not at other times in the presentation, build time in for your participants to reflect on what they're learning or how it applies to their work or their lives.
Yeah, I would say, especially if you have a very long training, like a day-long training, and there are a number of different concepts introduced, to have that reflection time after each kind of block of content, those 20-minute blocks of content that you talked about, Kyle. Have some type of Energizer, have some type of reflection, revisitor kind of event, so that way they can, okay, let's see what we learned here, reset, move on. And every block of new content should have its own opener and closer, right? It's not, if you have a day-long or a 2-day-long workshop, it's not one opener at the beginning, one closer clear at the end. It's for every new concept, new block of content that you are producing. Here we're only doing one because it's only 60 minutes and we're only talking about one concept, and that's designing effective presentations. But just know that if you have a full day workshop with a lot of different content that you're covering, you should have opener, closer, and everything built in for all of those sections. So if any of you have been to like an NCURA workshop, you will know that at 90 minutes, they have a coffee break. They have a 15-minute bio break, coffee break. That's that. And because this 90-20-10 rule is based on a lot of research that physically, like, I'm sorry, your rear goes numb after 90 minutes, right? And that's when people are fidgeting and moving because they need to get up. You might have people getting up and standing in the back of the room to stretch out. So based on the research, but just know that if you're doing a day-long training, that all of this applies to your different chunks of content. Okay, tools, Kyle.
So this is a bit of a change. We've been giving you awareness or experience awareness and theory on the content of your presentations and how to develop it, what to consider, how to time it, all that. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what to use for your presentation, what systems or what tools or what activities to build in. So here are some things you can build in. For activities, we have case studies, games, polls, practice questions. Are there any other types of activities you all have used in the past that we didn't list here? All right, well, you can think on that. We may not have captured everything, but build in activities where you can. Consider different types of sessions. So you can do a concurrent session, discussion session, a panel session, or a flipped classrooms. So there are different formats for delivering your presentation. Which one you choose should be driven by, of course, your objectives and the content you hope to deliver and what you feel would be most useful and effective for your audience. For example, I know Tricia and Kat and I were recently through our NCURA group talking about how we want to deliver a presentation around hiring and retention issues in higher education right now. And we figured, boy, this problem is so broad that it's probably not best addressed through just discussion or just a presenter delivering content. We need a panel. We need to get leaders from multiple institutions to talk about their experiences. So consider what you're trying to bring across and really who needs to be in the room and how to set it up. And then in terms of media, these days you have so many options. Of course, there's always PowerPoint like we're using today. You can bring across audio and visual media that does help engage people and help them experience something that's a little bit out of step with just talking, may keep them engaged longer. Can you go to the next slide, Tricia? Thanks. But also consider using different platforms. Not only do we have PowerPoint, but there are other ones out there, Prezi, Canva, Adobe Creative Cloud, and others. And they all bring different capabilities around how you can build in media or how your presentation can flow if you're trying to build a narrative and have a storyline. They have different color and font options, different eases of use, formatting and organizing. So if you find you have time to explore these different options, you may find it worthwhile to use in future presentations. And we touched on this a little bit earlier, but just to circle back, it does matter how much text you build into your presentation versus what you do with narrative and imagery. I remember when we polled you all early in this presentation and asked, what do you think makes for an effective presentation? Several of the responses were around, well, I don't want it to drone on forever. I hope there's not too much text. Well, why is that? Well, because it's boring. People can read a book on their own. They come to the presentation so you can deliver your own take on the material, your own insights, which probably you're not going to want to write out verbatim on a slide. So consider how much text you really need in your slides. Are there images or videos which would better explain the ideas you have? Coming back to engagers, energizers, how much do you as the presenter want to talk versus getting your audience to engage? And we've given you some principles for that already. Don't talk for more than 10 minutes at a time. Make sure your participants are engaging at least that much, if not more. And then figure out, is there some way I can develop a creative flow or make my presentation interactive? Because insofar as you do those things, you will be tremendously more successful in keeping your audience engaged.
Kyle, I want to mention one thing on the slides, because I know that people don't want content-rich slides. I think what people don't want is content-rich slides read to them. So if you are going to give the slides as a resource after, like sometimes I'll have really content-rich slides, but again, I set expectations. Like there's a lot of content on here because this is your resource leaving here. I'm not going to, go through each of the point on the slides. Instead, we're going to talk kind of higher level, and you have that slide there as a resource. So you can, as long as they're still readable, make sure they're readable, right? Have content-rich slides, but don't just sit there and read. We're adults, we know how to read, right? Or if you would rather just, again, put that information in like an appendix or something for people so they have those resources. The other thing I've gone to doing is actually some of the key information people need. I leave that blank and put a blank line, and I give them fillable handouts. So they actually have to type it in because that keeps them engaged as they go along. That way they still have the resource, but they had to fill out the resource on their own. They had to be engaged or else they missed that key information. So that's another way you can do that as well.
Well, and your content, I mean, you may have a sophisticated topic, which really does necessitate delivering a lot of content, but maybe consider, well, could I put, and you want to use the slides as a reference for folks, well, consider using a footnote with a link to a website that has the information rather than pasting it all onto your slides. So in any case, the cleaner you can keep your slides, probably the better. But as Trish is saying, if you must put text in your slides for reference, just make sure you're not reading it verbatim. And then some other questions just to consider your layout to keep people engaged, to make the presentation smoother. how should I organize my ideas in a way that they make sense? Am I comfortable with the transitions between ideas so it feels as if I do have a narrative? Make sure that, just like writing a paper, that if you have multiple points that are related, you group them together or consolidate them into one. Make sure you don't have redundant slides. And then back to time frame, can I fit this material into the hour or into the 90 minutes or not? And if you can't, then trim. I mean, get rid of what you need to get rid of and be realistic about the time you have. On to you, Trisha. Or no, I got this one. Or no, where are we?
That's totally
No,
fine.
this one's
Yep,
me,
yep,
still
that's
me.
you.
All right, coming back, C.O.R.E. Can I see in the chat we're reviewing here one more time? What does C.O.R.E stand for? Anybody in the chat? C.O.R.E.
Anyone
And
besides
not
Nyla?
Catherine, not Catherine's not allowed to.
All right,
Melissa says
Melissa.
closers, openers, revisitors, energizers. Very
All right,
good.
so
Okay.
So please remember that principle. Remember 90, 20, 10. Keep your slides concise and clean. Consider different modes of presenting. I mean, these are some of the takeaways for today.
I'm glad
Trisha,
you
is there
take
anything
notes.
else you want to?
No, I just, again, don't tell your audience you're going to do it. Just do it. We, could think about maybe one Energizer you would like to implement during your next presentation. And we still have like a minute here. I'm going to at least move to, don't forget the evaluation resources. This one resource has Unsplash for usable images rather than just clip art, but real photos because they're more appealing to our audience. But what one Energizer, closer, opener are you going to implement? Will you share with us? Can people think about maybe an Energizer or some kind of closer that you want to use during your next presentation? And either unmute or write it in the chat.
While you all do that, I will just give you some notes on what's coming up. In July, we have a roundup. That's like we did a little networking session 2 months ago, and it was so well received. So thank you all for coming to that. I hope to see you in July. You'll see the announcement coming out in June. Regional meeting is coming up in Tucson, Arizona for October to November. So we put the website in the chat. Our chair is here, Natalie. Also, she put in the chat that she's looking for some more presenters. Some good ideas were presented or submitted for presentations, but some people need a co-presenter. So if you don't have an idea yet, but you're like, I think that I might want to volunteer and help out some way, contact Natalie. Natalie Buys, our regional chair for this year. Did people put stuff in yet?
Nope, that's okay. But as your reflector, because we have to have a closer and reflection time, think about maybe a new concept that you learned today and think about how you're going to implement. There you go. So Mary says she's going to be more mindful of the 90, 20, 10 and how it impacts and applies presentations. Thanks, Mary. Appreciate that. So, and please, we really value your feedback. We know, how to make this better in the future. We also know what you want to see more or less of by taking the time to fill out the evaluation. And on time, time for a closer. Yep. And we are right at the hour. We really appreciate everybody's time. We appreciate your participation in the polls and chat and raising your hands and typing in. So we can't wait till we're together again in a real physical space as well. So.
Yes, thank you to our presenters, Trisha and Kyle. We'll see you for part 3. What do you say part 3 is?
Yeah, so it's going to be on best practices in delivering, right? We're finally going to get to the delivery part. We've done all this designing. It's time to rock and roll. And because we're doing roundup in July and because regional meeting is in October, we'll look at someplace in that August, September time frame to deliver that part. So stay tuned for that.
Thank you all for coming today.
Thank
Guys, have
you,
a great
everyone.
long weekend. Thanks.